Thank you, everybody. It is this evening. It's 5 o'clock now. Thank you, everybody, for coming along to this Fringe event titled Blockchain and Startups Driving Jobs, Inclusive Growth and Innovation Across the UK in partnership with SME4Labour. You're not here to hear from me, here to hear from our wonderful panel, so I'm going to get on to them in a second. But before I do, let me introduce them. We have been joined by Anthony Albanese, who's not the Prime Minister of Australia, but is a managing partner and chief operating officer of Andreessen Horowitz crypto branch. Andreessen Horowitz, as many of you will know, is one of the world's foremost venture capital firms. They have invested in a huge number of companies, Facebook and others in early stages, and also in Coinbase, which we'll come on to in a second. Anthony is based in the UK, leads the firm's UK operations, and if I'm correct in saying, you were previously the Chief Regulatory Officer of the New York Stock Exchange.
That's correct.
So it's very nice to have you. Thank you for coming. We are also joined by my constituency neighbour. You've got two Glasgow MPs for the price of one. Zubir Ahmed, who is the MP for Glasgow South West, and also the PPS to West Streeting, the Health Secretary. And on my left, we've got Katie Harries, who is the Director of International Policy at Coinbase, aforementioned, that's been invested in by Andreessen Horowitz, and you were previously at Goldman Sachs. I think that's right in saying. Technology is a passion of mine. It's integral, I think, to Labour's growth agenda. Obviously, all of our missions over the next 4 or 5 years are driven by economic growth. None of it is possible without economic growth. And technology is, I think, the fundamental tenet of all economic growth. So what we're going to talk about this evening is how we think blockchain can be a part of that growth and how it can help small and medium-sized enterprises in particular. So we'll start with some opening remarks from each of our panellists. So shall I start with you, Katie? Perhaps just give us an overview of what Coinbase does and how you think crypto can help support small and medium-sized businesses.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Katie Harries, from Coinbase, one of the world's largest leading crypto asset exchanges. I'm also running a movement called Stand with Crypto. This is an initiative that started in the US. It's had considerable traction and success in the US with 1.4 million advocates. Now, those advocates are now kind of crypto voters in the election campaign in the US, and it's having really significant success there. We've brought that movement to the UK, but we're always very conscious that there's very different political environments in the US versus the UK. So we're doing a lot of thinking around what does it mean to stand with crypto in the UK. And what we're trying to do is galvanise the grassroots community to shine a spotlight on all the innovation that's taking place up and down the country with small business entrepreneurs that are driving jobs, growth and innovation around the UK economy. So there's a huge number of innovations. I can jump in straight away and talk about blockchain technology, or we can take it in turns to go through. Is that helpful?
Yeah. Well, let's introduce everyone, and then I'll come back to that point. Because I think that would be very useful. Zubir, you I learned about 5 minutes ago, have also been involved in using blockchain for healthcare records as well. Do you want to give us a quick introduction?
So thanks, Gordon. So yes, I'm by no means an expert in financial markets or financial technology, but I have used blockchain for the purposes of making hospital records portable and safe when transferring between countries, between hospitals and between organizations. So I'm a big fan of blockchain technology because of its democratization and its quite bizarrely its transparency actually compared to other technologies. I'm particularly interested as I have a lot of fintech companies in my constituency, including Barclays, getting more involved in the cryptocurrency space. £12 billion industry in the UK, growing. I think we're very much behind in the US in terms of making it a kind of a normal aspect of our financial services market. I think we need to catch up quite quickly and leverage all of its benefits. So very excited to have some discussions around that today.
Fantastic. I should have also said that Zubir, before he was elected as an MP, was one of Scotland's leading transplant surgeons. So he's a very smart man. And then Anthony, I wonder if you could just give us an overview of Andreessen Horowitz in the UK and how you see crypto helping small businesses in the UK.
Sure. So yes, I'm a partner at Andreessen Horowitz. We're based on the west coast of the United States in California. We have over $32 billion invested across the board in tech. We have over $6 billion in crypto blockchain alone. We're also invested in AI, biotech, and many other areas. This is our first ever office outside the United States. So not only our first ever office in the UK, but our first ever office outside the United States. We opened the office here in the UK a little over a year ago, and we want to help build the tech ecosystem here in the UK, and we're looking for investments. We're looking to build the crypto Web3 community. We're hoping we can work with the Labour government to come up with strong regulation that will help the good players in this industry survive and thrive while weeding out the bad players. And as mentioned, there seems to be a bit of a race between the U.S. and the U.K. now, who can be the leader in regulating and attracting blockchain technology, and we'd like to help the U.K. In that race.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Perhaps, Katie, I could start with you with a simple question, which many here will know the answer to, but some might not, which is, what is blockchain technology?
It's a very good question, a very good place to start. I always think that lots of people when they think of crypto assets and blockchain technology, think about Bitcoin as a way to transfer value peer-to-peer, 24/7 instant settlement. But actually, the innovation doesn't sit just with Bitcoin. It's the underlying technology that really has huge opportunities for innovation. And I always think of it as like a giant database. But rather than it being managed by a single computer, it's being managed by millions of computers. And so, as a result of that decentralization, it's very difficult to kind of hack. So there's increased security. So as a result of that, you've got a blockchain, a technology that's immutable, it's permanent, it's transparent, and that is a huge innovation. And as a result of that, we're seeing a significant number of applications. So just as a few examples, payments, faster, cheaper payments, stable coins. This is a way to transfer value 24/7 instant settlement. So really introducing competition in the payment space. The next iteration of the internet, which I think Anthony might come back to, but read, write, own, Web3, huge opportunity for the UK to get on the forefront of the technological revolution towards Web3. And then in terms of the city, where's the next big bang for the city going to come from? Tokenization, getting digital debt, digital equity on the blockchain. And I think there's a huge opportunity for the UK's capital markets there. And then just finally, as we're going to talk about, is just for SMEs. Blockchain offers huge opportunities for innovation in terms of driving efficiencies and solving society's problems through the blockchain. I think that will drive jobs and growth and innovation in local communities across the UK. So the blockchain, I think everyone thinks about it as Bitcoin in the first instance, but the applications are so much broader than that. This is all about the underlying technology. This is a horizontal technology that can support every aspect of the UK economy.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Katie. That's very useful, and I'm sure the audience found it very, very useful to learn about how this technology can help a lot of different businesses. Anthony, if I could turn to you, there have been discussions in the past about, obviously, as Katie said, driven by Bitcoin in a lot of ways, how this can or should replace traditional banking altogether. What do you make of that debate? I mean, is crypto something that will totally overhaul the financial system, or do you see it as a sort of augmented part of a wider framework?
I think it will dramatically change the financial system. So I don't know that I would use the word overhaul, but I think it will change it. As Katie said, we're seeing products, financial platforms built on blockchain that are cheaper, more efficient, more effective, much faster and better for cross-border payments. So I think utilizing the technology will transform the financial system and make it better. And I think there's a real benefit to small and medium-sized businesses, because you can, it being cheaper and faster and not requiring large organizations to create the products that you once needed. You once needed this big organization to create a financial product. Now we invest in very small teams that make transformative projects. The teams are, a handful of people. They raise a fairly small amount of money, and they're able, because of blockchain, to build these incredible products that are far-reaching and have such a great impact.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Zubir, you've talked a bit about how blockchain can be used in healthcare. From working in the NHS, was there anything that sort of stuck out to you, how we can use this to make things more efficient?
I think the main thing for working in the health service was actually the confidence in data sharing that it gave people, precisely because there is no one single point of data control. And that's really important for people, I think, who are worried about hacking. We've had some notorious Stories recently of various NHS organisations up and down the country that have found themselves to be very vulnerable because they've kept things at a central point of control. But I think the wider challenge of blockchain in the financial markets, of which generally I am supportive, but I'd like to throw this open to my more expert colleagues. When I am supportive, I get people coming back to me and saying, well, actually, it's not a benign product. There's a carbon footprint there, increasing energy costs and increasing energy uses. I'm just wondering, when we're having this conversation around growth with cryptocurrency and blockchain, what do you think we can do on that side to kind of alleviate and ameliorate concerns around carbon footprint?
It's a very good question. I'm going to pass that to you, Katie.
I'm going to come back on the first comment you made around healthcare, and I think what's interesting is that healthcare at the moment, records are very, very siloed. But if you can imagine a world where healthcare records were kind of shared across schools, hospitals, pharmacists, it would create much more efficiency in terms of the healthcare service. And as you said, part of the reason for that is because of concerns around kind of privacy and also around security. But actually there are a number of blockchain-based firms that are already looking to address this. I think there's a very interesting firm called D-Health, which is trying to use the blockchain, kind of coordinate and make sure that they can put all the data on the blockchain and provide efficiencies to the health service, but also maintain that security of the data. And if you even go a step further, can you imagine a situation where you could actually incentivize individuals to provide their data for research purposes? And I think there are a few other firms that are doing that through kind of tokens, so incentivizing individuals to participate. I think a lot of individuals only participate in that research if they've had a family member affected by an illness. But actually, if you could incentivize participation much more broadly, but people felt confident that their data wasn't going to be hacked, or they could also participate on an anonymous basis, I think there would be much more incentive to participate. So I think healthcare is one area where there's a huge number of opportunities to reform the health service using blockchain technology. And then on carbon footprint, short answer there is that I think we're moving to a place where we're going to be using proof of stake blockchains, which significantly reduces the carbon footprint. I can't remember the stats off the top of my head, but it's a huge reduction, which I think goes back to the point around like staking, which is like the consensus mechanism that's used for the proof of stake blockchains. And I think one of the big challenges for the UK is getting the regulatory clarity around staking, which is so crucial to proof of stake blockchains and all the innovation that's taking place on top of them towards Web3. So I feel very comfortable on the kind of carbon footprint that the industry is heading in the right direction and that a lot's being done. And actually to preserve proof of stake blockchains, we need that regulatory clarity around the staking, which is the consensus mechanism.
Can I add one thing on the healthcare front? We just invested in a company that is using blockchain to manage biosamples. It was actually a very interesting story. The founder, when he's in his 20s now, when he was a teenager, he had skin cancer, and it was a very dangerous situation. And they took some very significant biosamples, big grafts of skin from him. And he got older, and he was wondering, where are those biosamples? And realized there was no way for him to track at the hospital, had lost track of where they were sent and what they were used for. And so he created this company on the blockchain called AminoChain, and it allows people to own, manage, and track biosamples that they give using blockchain, and it helps researchers track down biosamples they need in treating diseases. So it's a really phenomenal company. We're very proud to be an investor, and shows how blockchain can really be transformative in the healthcare industry.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. Both Katie and Anthony have mentioned SMEs and the efficiencies and innovation that blockchain can unlock. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about how you think blockchain for SMEs can sort of reduce bureaucracy, create more efficient processes. What are the examples of that come to mind?
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the things I find interesting when you speak to policymakers, and through Stand with Crypto, we've done a number of events in the House of Commons, and we have MPs and laws come in, they meet some of the businesses, and they often say to us, we came thinking that we were going to learn a lot about the technology, and we came away hearing about supply chain tracking or health records or telecommunications, and they say we had no idea that blockchain technology actually touched every sector of the economy. And I think the way to think about blockchain technology is that this is an underlying technology that supports every part of the economy, and so that it can be used in multiple different ways. And I can give you just maybe a few more examples. So supply chain tracking is one that I think is actually evolving very well. So just as an example, there's a firm called Nobody's Child. It's an ethical, sustainable clothing business. There's a lot of focus at the moment on kind of regulatory requirements, but also from an ethical standpoint, making sure that you know where your clothes come from, making sure that they're ethically sourced. The different components of the garments, where have they come from, what are the working conditions, etc. And what Nobody's Child has done is they've collaborated with blockchain firms, and they've created a digital twin, an NFT, where you can track from start to finish along the supply chain from where all the constituent parts of the clothing comes from. So that's just one example, but on supply chain tracking, I know there's a firm called Circularize, which is working with Jaguar Land Rover, for example. But I think supply chain tracking is a really great example where it helps firms meet like regulatory requirements in terms of digital product passports, but also helps them become more sustainable and more ethical, and giving more visibility to consumers. And then I give you another example, actually, which is closer to home. There's a fantastic telecommunications company called Weaver Labs. And I'm sure many of you have been in a situation where you've been in a stadium or you've been on a train where you can't get access to your phone or the internet. And Weaver Labs fundamentally is a telecommunications company. They talk about themselves as being telecommunications first and foremost, but having built their business on the blockchain. And what they do is they incentivize smaller providers to provide excess capacity in those venues where you can't get access to internet. And they incentivize that through kind of tokens, for example. So they're trying to increase coverage of telecommunications internet, and they've invested 9 million in Liverpool to get a project off the ground. So I think that's a really, really exciting project that's also underway.
Very good local example. Excellent.
I've got one example I could add to that list, if it's helpful, on SMEs. We invested in a company recently called Blackbird, which using blockchain to help restaurants connect with their patrons and their customers. And it's such an interesting use case because it's something we all do. We all go to restaurants, so it's something that's very comprehensible. But they're creating on blockchain a way to connect restaurants with their patrons to get reservations, to earn loyalty rewards, to understand better who their customers are, for customers to connect with each other. So creating communities, and it's really helping restaurants in New York. They're using it. A lot of restaurants are using it. It's helping small businesses, restaurants, build and scale and create a user base, a customer base, and draw them into the restaurants and making it more efficient to operate for their customers. So I think it's a great example of a small businesses using blockchain in a very comprehensible way to scale and expand.
Fantastic. Both Anthony and Katie have spoken about the regulatory regime and having some kind of certainty about what that's going to bring. Zubir, I wonder from the perspective of a new MP, whether you could tell us what the new intake of MPs might think about this. I mean, this is obviously an issue which a lot of people find quite technical. As a new MP, what do you make of it, and how do you think we can provide that clarity?
Yeah, I think precisely because they do find it technical, it's really important to have that regulatory framework up and running as soon as possible, for it to provide confidence, but not an impediment to the growth that we need to see in this sector. And I think we are both two of many new MPs, and I think we have a particular responsibility in this space to try and make sure that regulation, balances those two prerogatives. And I think obviously yourself, Gordon, are intricately more informed than most people about this technology, and I think that's a really important perspective to bear, especially when we are legislating, because this kind of legislation will require a level of technical detail and know-how on the part of parliamentarians than perhaps has never previously had to be the case. Yeah. And I think we're in a very fortunate position with the new intake of MPs, because we have many who do have that direct experience of this industry, both in terms of the financial services sector, but also more widely of the blockchain technology. And as we've just spoken about, this transcends kind of traditional borders between industries such as health and finance and biological sciences. And in some ways that's the kind of hallmark of our government, because we know delivering on our 5 missions also needs to transcend the borders between the traditional government departments. And in some ways it sits quite nicely in our kind of philosophical approach to governance.
Absolutely. Just to reiterate what Zubir said, I mean, I've been quite struck in the new intake of MPs that we've got, how many people there are with an expertise or an understanding or desire to understand technology, the sector. I mean, I think, I think back to, some of you might remember Mark Zuckerberg testifying in front of Congress 2018, and the questions he was getting from the senators were literally like, what is a cookie? How does your website make money? And this was the United States Senate, and I was just struck by how poor the understanding of the tech the industry was, at the highest levels of the United States Congress. We have now, I think, in this new intake of MPs, got a lot of people who have an interest, and I hope that will start to filter through, as Zubir says, as we start to get towards some of the regulation. Partly for Zubir and I's benefits as well as the audience, I wonder, Katie, Coinbase operates all around the world, lots of different jurisdictions. Are there any other countries that have pursued regulation that has worked well, or in your view has not worked well, that perhaps we should look at and learn from?
Yeah, I think I would start by saying that I'm very encouraged by the path that the UK is on. I think we're clearly on the pathway to getting the regulatory clarity that we need, and as Anthony said, there are other jurisdictions in the world that are further behind on that, and I think there's a huge opportunity for the UK. Of course, if you look just across the channel, you'll see that the EU has already agreed MiCA, and it's in the implementation phase of that, and I think the UK is in a really unique position where it can look at MiCA and cherry pick the best bits and address some of the things that might not work in practice. But I think, just going back to the previous comment around what the government can do, I was actually very encouraged by a speech that Rachel Reeves gave a few months ago, where she said that she wanted the UK to become a hub for tokenization, which I thought was very, very positive. I think there have been kind of previous iterations on the language versus the previous government. I think a few years ago we heard John Glenn say he wanted the UK to become a global crypto hub, and then you had the FTX failure, and the narrative changed somewhat, and they talked about wanting the UK to become a centre of excellence for Web3, and I'm hoping that Rachel Reeves' comments on wanting to become a centre of tokenisation is an iteration on that theme, and we'll see some very positive things coming out of that. But I think just more generally, I think it would be very, very helpful to have the government come out and set out some very positive messages that the UK is open for business. I would never underestimate the impact of the kind of top line messages from government. I think it gives firms like Coinbase the confidence to invest in the UK, and I think that's very, very positive. But I would also say that regulation is also very important. I think there's sometimes the perception that industries like ours might not want to be regulated, but actually we really, really do. We want that regulatory clarity because, again, it gives us the confidence to invest and to grow. So I think moving quickly on regulation is super important, and I would just end by saying that in addition to the kind of regulatory piece, I think we've been talking about the impact on the blockchain on small businesses. I think there's a tendency for us all to kind of go into the treasury to talk about blockchain technology and crypto assets because they're the ones that are going to be that are designing the regulatory, thinking through the regulatory framework. But actually, I think we need a cross-government strategy. We need DCIT to be focused on the blockchain, to be thinking through how it can be used in the provision of public services and health, but also working with the Department of Business and how we can encourage small businesses to digitalise and make use of this new technology. So I think there's a real opportunity for the government to kind of, and for jobs.
Apprenticeships.
Exactly. To take the bull by the horns and get moving. We really want them to move quickly as a matter of priority on regulation, but also to take this kind of cross-government strategy. And actually, I've got one more point, which is I think DCIT is off. We hear a lot from DCIT around AI, and of course AI is very important. But I think sometimes it can be to the exclusion of other technologies. And I think what the UK should be doing is thinking about creating superclusters of new frontier technologies. Because actually there are a lot of synergies between these technologies. And I think the UK would benefit if it had an overall strategy for all these frontier technologies.
And I would just add one point, if I could, on the jurisdiction question. The US passed legislation over the past year through the House of Representatives. So it's not law yet. It got through the House of Representatives. It needs to get through Congress, through the Senate next in order to get fully through Congress. But it was still a momentous event in the US that the United States Congress, the House of Representatives, passed bipartisan legislation regulating crypto. Never been done before in the history of the United States. 71 Democrats voted for it, which was huge, because historically crypto had been in the US, more of a Republican cause. So to have such bipartisan support is huge. And there's still a long way to go. It has to get through the US Senate, and we've got the elections coming up in the US. But your question was, where are we seeing governments acting. We're seeing it in the U.S., and I know that we, at our firm, in Andreessen Horowitz, we don't want the UK to be left behind. We'd love to see the UK either be the first to enact legislation or stay, lockstep with the U.S. So I do think it's going to happen in the U.S. and in the UK and hopefully elsewhere. So let's be a leader here.
Yeah.
Got just one more point. I think you mentioned earlier on, you were asking about how new MPs should be thinking about this. And I think one thing that's really incumbent on the industry is to demystify the space. I think we're often faced with lots of misconceptions around crypto assets and blockchain technology. So one of the misconceptions I often hear is blockchain technology good, but tokens bad. And I think we have to explain that actually the two are inextricably linked, and the tokens are used to kind of power the blockchain, for example. And I often hear, well, crypto assets is all about speculation. And I think, of course, there is some speculation in the market. I think it's a reflection of where we are on the adoption curve. But actually, individuals might hold a token like ETH, for example, because they think the price will go up, but they also hold it because there's social utility. So I hold ETH, for example, because I may want to send an NFT or whatever it may be. So I think it's really important for us to demystify blockchain technology and crypto assets for new MPs. But also when we're thinking about regulation, the kind of social utility of the technology is really important. So we don't just see it as a financial innovation. It's much broader than that.
100%. Couldn't agree more. I think that's absolutely bang on. Previously, you mentioned the failure of FTX and exchanges. Zubir, I wondered from the perspective of an MP, I mean, we're obviously want to see this industry do well, but we're also want to make sure that our constituents are not going to be in any sort of any additional financial risk than they otherwise should be. Reflecting on some of the failure of FTX and do you get a sense that actually some people are concerned about the dangers of cryptocurrency?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are, and again, part of that is the element of mystique around it, but the other part is that over half of companies involved in this space are new startups, right? So it's very easy, as I mentioned before, for bad actors to occupy and consume this space, and that's where I think our responsibility comes into its own, really, to demystify it, but also to produce a safety net, and we'll have to sit down and decide what percentage of a person's income we allow them to invest in this kind of space, and there are multiple platforms already doing that. I know Coinbase is also quite responsible in that sense about how much they allow people to load up onto their card, as it were. So these will have to be discussed, as they're discussed with any technology that's new. And safety, the consumer safety, I think, especially in the infancy of this, to imbibe confidence will have to be the buzzword. But over time, that will, I'm sure, it'll evolve.
Yeah. And I wonder actually, Anthony, I know Andreessen Horowitz was started in Silicon Valley. I don't know if you were based there before, but there's certainly there's an attitude in Silicon Valley about failing fast and failure is not necessarily a bad thing, and I endorse that actually for new companies and startups. Do you feel there's a cultural difference here in the UK when you're investing in early stage startups where actually we don't think about failure in quite as positive a way, if that sounds right, than Americans do?
Potentially, I think that, I do think that failure is part of it, right? I mean, we ran this incubator program here in the UK. It was in London in the spring. We had 24 companies that got selected that we funded and we made an investment in. 25% of them were from the UK, which is great. And then at the end of the program, they got up and we brought together a lot of investors around the world to hear their pitches to decide if they wanted to invest capital. And you'd be surprised to hear how many of the founders who got up and told their stories talked about their failures. And this is my third startup, this is my fourth startup. And the first two failed, but here's what I learned from that. So I do think failure is part of the process. It's part of the startup world, it's part of the venture world. That's why you hear about folks in Silicon Valley talk about it a lot. I think failure makes you better and helps you get to the right outcome. So maybe culturally that's not as as talked about here or not as accepted here, but I do think it's something for people to understand and to realize failure is not a bad thing if it leads to something better.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of things I want to cover, and then we'll open up to questions from the audience. The Bank of England have consulted on a new digital currency, a sort of digital pound. I think they got the response to the consultation in January. I wonder, with your kind of industry hat on, Casey, what your reflection is on that and how it might work.
Yeah, so I think as a general point, I think we support a mixed payment ecosystem where you have stable coins, CBDCs, tokenized deposits. But we do think there are benefits of stable coins in particular. I think with CBDCs, there are going to be limitations, for example, around programmability. And I do have concerns that the proposals as set out by the FCA and the Bank of England in terms of regulating digital money, particularly stablecoins, will mean that stablecoins can't compete on a level playing field with other forms of digital money. And I think if the UK really wants to create competition in the payment space, then it needs to think through that regulatory framework very carefully. And so just by way of example, I think the capital requirements for stablecoins, for example, are potentially going to be higher than e-money. And we want the two to be able to compete. You've got a situation where the Bank of England wants to require issuers to hold reserves at the central bank with no ability to earn interest, and so effectively mandating a business model that doesn't currently exist. Yeah. So I don't have specific views on CBDC. I think there's a role for them to play, but I think as a general point, I think we want to make sure that the government creates and the regulators create a framework where all the different types of kind of payment mechanisms can compete with each other, and then we should let the consumers decide.
Sounds entirely reasonable. Katie mentioned that Rachel had said in a speech earlier this year that she wants the UK to be a tokenisation hub. That was also in our financial services review, which we published earlier in the year. Anthony, you will have with your investment hat on quite a good overview of the industry and whether you think that's feasible. And I suppose my question is, do you think it's feasible for the UK to be a securities tokenisation hub? And if it is feasible, how do we go about making that happen as policymakers?
I think it's very possible. I think it all comes down to regulation. Our companies want to be located where there is clear regulation that lays out what they can do, how they can tokenize, how they can function. So if the UK is the first jurisdiction to come up with clear guidelines, again, that help the industry thrive, allow for tokenization, but weed out the bad players, I think absolutely it can be the hub, because there is no place now in the world with that regulation. Like I said, the US is maybe halfway there, but we're not there yet. So I think whoever puts the regulatory framework together and enacts it into law first will be a leader.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. With that, I think we'll open up to questions from the audience. Zubir's got to jump for another appointment, but we've got roving mics. We've got a hand here in the front.
Thank you. My name is John. I'm from the FT Group, from Banking, Risk and Regulation. This is for Anthony and Katie. I think you mentioned regulatory clarity about 10 times there. We've been speaking about the UK turning into a hub. We know it's a new Labour administration in place. How would you rate your conversation so far around seeking that regulatory clarity? And what are the particular things that you would like to see? You mentioned staking legislation, you mentioned stablecoin. I think you've spoken about other jurisdictions. Let's face it, I think other jurisdictions have stolen a march in the UK. I think that's fair enough to say. So what would you like to see and how quickly would you like to see it?
Thank you, John. We'll start with Anthony.
So as far as the discussions we've had, look, I think they've been positive. They were kind of early days because the Labour government has come in recently. So we're early days in the conversations. But the conversations have been positive, and we've been hearing how much the Labour government wants to revitalize and prop up the economy here and create growth and create jobs. And I think they recognize that blockchain and Web3 can be a big part of that. So I think they recognize that. I think, as might have been Katie mentioned, someone mentioned on the panel, a lot of it comes down to education. So one thing we're seeing in meetings is they're interested in blockchain, but they want to better understand it. There is some fear, some concern. What are the risks? Should we be concerned about the risks? And what can it do for the economy here in the UK? And I think when we have those meetings and we lay out, well, sure, there are risks in every industry, but here's how the risks are mitigated. And here's how it can help the UK economy. This is how it can become a hub and attract developers and entrepreneurs that are now in Silicon Valley and New York. Here's what it can do for the economy. Here's the global reach. they're very interested. You see their eyes light up, and they think, okay, this is something we want to be a part of. So I think there's a lot of interest. I think we have to keep having the meetings, keep educating, and I believe that we'll make progress here. That's why we're here. We wouldn't be here if we didn't think we would make progress here.
I agree with all of that. As I said, I'm very, very encouraged with the comments that Rachel Reeves has already made to date. I think we were in a slightly unfortunate situation where we were expecting to get many pieces of legislation in June, and as a result of the early election, we didn't get the legislation laid that we needed for the regulatory clarity to come. And I think there's an open question as to the timing for when that might come now. So I think we've been very, very encouraged to date, but we really want to see the UK moving quickly now on that legislation. And to Anthony's point, I think the government can see the opportunities around blockchain technology, but they're also aware of and concerned by some of the risks. And what we would say to them is the way that you address those risks is that you move quickly on regulation. So regulation is about giving certainty to the industry to invest and to innovate, but it's also about consumer protection as well, and that's why it's so important that it's prioritised.
Thank you very much. Anyone else have a question? Just raise your hand. Everybody's very well behaved. Oh, yeah.
What type of regulations are you talking about? I mean, have you got any papers on it? Anything people can read about?
Yeah, so I think there are kind of three big pieces of legislation that we're hoping for and regulatory frameworks that will come down the line. So the first one is staking. I think there's some ambiguity around the regulatory treatment of staking currently, and we really want kind of clarity around that. And the staking, as I said before, is the kind of consensus mechanism that supports proof-of-stake blockchains and all the innovation that is taking place on top of them towards Web3. So we really need that regulatory clarity to provide the certainty to the industry to invest and to grow. So we're expecting legislation at some point providing that regulatory clarity on how staking is treated. So that's the first piece. The second piece is how stablecoins should be regulated. There's a big piece of work that's going on there, so we need the legislation, but I know the FCA and the Bank of England have already released discussion papers on what that regulatory framework should look like. And
Is that towards payments, or is it towards, like, for me, payments are the worst risks?
yes.
Whereas, like, hospital records, if you restrict it to records and tracking, you probably get a lot.
Yes, so the regulation on stablecoins is focused particularly on the kind of payments piece, given how important that is in terms of kind of stability. Exactly. And then, which is rightly why many jurisdictions around the world, when they kind of go through the stages of regulation, a lot of them start with AML, then they move on to stablecoins, given the importance of payments. And then the third piece is the broader regulatory framework. So in the UK, they also want to bring forward legislation to regulate kind of centralised actors like Coinbase at the exchanges, in terms of like risk management, governance, capital requirements, disclosures, transparency, etc. And that piece will come as well further down the line. And that's what Europe is already moving ahead with, and we want to see all of that in the UK.
What I'm saying is I just think the regulation on the sort of chain, the blockchain thing for records and tracking would move forward a lot quicker than payments, because payments is so up and down and there's so many issues with it. I'm just wondering if there's anything in particular just for those.
For payments?
So is your argument that if you sort of remove payments from the equation, you're able to make progress more quickly?
Yeah,
yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. What do you make?
Yeah, so I think given like how widely stablecoins are and market cap of stablecoins, I think the focus of regulators is in the first instance is stablecoins. I think given the importance to kind of financial stability if they're used in the kind of in payments in the UK. So I think that's generally the focus of the regulators, which I think is probably right, and then they can move to the broader regulatory framework. But in terms of the technology, we wouldn't advocate for regulating the technology itself. I think it's all about regulating the kind of centralised actors like Coinbase or the exchange, rather than trying to regulate a technology.
Anthony, anything in response to the question about specifics?
No, I think Katie covered it. Look, I think it's as Katie said, timing is the issue. I think there is a lot of interest in coming up with a regulatory framework here, and I understand your point. What's going to slow it down, what's going to move it more quickly, but I do think we just need to prioritize it and have a fulsome regulatory framework that covers all aspects of the blockchain technology and the different use cases and allows builders to build.
Fantastic. Well, if there are no further questions, can I thank our fantastic panellists? Can we put our hands together and say thank you to them?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.